Hi, I'm Mark Milne, Finance Director for the Town of Barnstable, and this is a review of the fiscal year 2025 tax levy shifting options. Every year, there are two tax levy shifting options that the Barnstable Town Council takes up in order to set the tax rate. The first is required by Massachusetts general law, which is setting a minimum residential factor, commonly referred to as the split tax rate. And this allows a community to shift a portion of the tax levy from the residential class of property to the commercial, industrial, and personal property classes. The second and optional tax levy shifting option is to whether or not to adopt what's called a residential exemption, which increases the residential tax rate. The amount of the tax levy paid by the residential class remains the same, but because of the exempted residential value, the levy is distributed over less assessed value, resulting in a higher tax rate. The higher rate creates a shift within the class that reduces the taxes paid by homeowners with moderately valued properties. Those taxes are then paid by owners of rental properties, vacation homes, and higher valued homes. So first, how do we allocate the tax levy? Well, it's based on the assessed value for each class of property. Assessed values are determined by analyzing the last full calendar years of sales data, which was calendar year 2023. So as a result, these assessed values on the FY25 tax bills may not reflect current market value. And as this table illustrates, the residential property class comprises about almost 90% of the town's total value, and the total residential class is just over $22 billion. As far as the change year over year in assessed value from FY25 to 24, you can see that most classes of property stayed relatively the same, some minor changes in overall value, with the exception of the personal property class, which saw almost a 14% increase in its assessed value. Most of that is a result of the Vineyard Wind infrastructure coming onto the town's assessed value rolls. Another significant portion of that infrastructure was recognized in fiscal year 25, and that's a bulk of that growth of $70 million that we see in the overall assessed value for that class of property. Overall, the town's assessed value increased from 24.5 billion to 24.8 billion, or about 1%. Next, we take a look at how the maximum allowable levy is calculated. We take the fiscal year levy limit from the previous year, which is 143.6 million, and we increase that by 2.5% under Proposition 2.5, which is about 3.6 million. And then we add a factor for new property growth, or property that has come onto the tax rolls that wasn't previously on the tax rolls, and that's about $1.7 million. And that gives us a fiscal year 2025 levy limit of 148.9 million. And to that, we're allowed to add any voter-approved exclusions or special assessments. We have two of them, one being our share of the debt service for the Cape Cod Regional Technical High School's new building and the Cape Cod Commission assessment. And that gives us a total maximum allowable levy for fiscal year 2025 of $151,154,000. To determine the tax rate, we take that tax levy and divide it into the total assessed value, and then multiply that result by a factor of 1,000 to come up with the tax rate before any tax levy shifting options. So the projected tax rate for fiscal year 2025 is $6.10 per $1,000 of valuation. This is how that tax levy will be allocated by class. Again, it's based on the overall percentage value of town property. The residential class, making up 89.56% of all value in town, will pay 89.56% of that $151 million tax levy, or $135,379,000, with the balance being paid by the commercial, industrial, and personal property tax classes. So option one allows the community to split the tax rate, whereby the tax rate for the CIP class could be 1.5 times greater than that of the residential class. And this table illustrates what the tax levy would be for each class under a 5% shift, multiples of 5% shifts. As you can see, the residential rate would drop about 3 cents at every shift of 5, with correspondingly the CIP rate going up about 30 cents. This graph illustrates the tax bill impact of each one of those shifts using the median residential assessed value for fiscal year 2025, which is $612,800. So a commercial property at that value would pay $5,607 at a maximum shift of 1.5, and the residential property would pay $3,534. And as the blue line illustrates, the financial benefit to the residential property owner using this tool is not that significant. Correspondingly, the financial impact to a CIP property owner is significant, again, because that tax rate for the CIP class goes up about 30 cents or more at each shift of 5, and the residential rate only goes down 3 cents at each one of those shifts. Here's a history of the tax levy allocation over the last 10 years. So overall, the tax levy has grown from 110 million to 151 million, and that growth is about 36.73% over the 10-year period. But you can see the residential levy has increased more than that, and the CIP levy has increased less than that on a percentage basis. And that's because the growth in value of the residential class has outpaced the growth in value of the CIP class. So, for example, what a community could accomplish with adopting a split tax rate would, if they wanted to equalize the percentage growth in the tax levy for all classes, and by that I mean the residential levy would go up 36.73%, as well as the CIP levy going up 36.73% over this 10-year period. You could accomplish that, to equalize that, by adopting a split tax rate of 1.155. And that would result in about $2,427,000 being shifted from the residential class to the CIP class. Again, not a recommendation, just an illustration as to what a community could accomplish with adopting a split tax rate if that were their tax policy. Option two is the residential exemption. This is, again, not mandatory that a community vote on this every single year, but as Barnstable has a residential exemption currently in place, it is something that we bring forward to the town council every year to see if they want to continue with one. So the town council can authorize up to a 35% exemption for Barnstable residents. The property must be the property owner's primary residence for tax filing purposes, and they must own it as of January 1, 2024 to qualify for the 2025 residential exemption. The option shifts taxes only within the residential class and does not impact the CIP property classes. 18 communities currently have a residential exemption. Barnstable implemented one originally in fiscal year 2006. We currently have approximately 11,247 qualifying properties in town. That changes every day. And the result would be a higher tax rate if this were implemented, would be a higher tax rate for all residential property owners and a deduction from every qualified property's value before the tax is calculated at the higher tax rate. So here's how we determine the value of the residential exemption. We take the total residential value and divide it by total residential parcels, and that gives us an average residential value of $863,000. using the adopted percentage of 25% for fiscal year 24, repeating that again for 25 would result in a exempted value of $215,785 for FY25. If we have 11,247 parcels eligible, this would mean that we would be exempting $2,426,928,000 of value from taxes in fiscal year 25. So to come up with a residential tax rate under a residential exemption, you take that exempted value and reduce the residential value by it, resulting in a net tax value of $19,760,000,000. Again, the residential levy doesn't change. We're still going to collect $135,379,000 from the residential class, and that results in a residential rate of $6.85, which is higher than the $6.10 for the CIP rate. This chart illustrates the tax bill impact at various valuations. You can see by the blue bar, which represents the property tax bill at these values if no exemption were adopted, and the orange bar representing the property tax bill with a 25% residential exemption, that the greatest financial benefit are to those lower valued properties, and that financial benefit diminishes as the property value increases to a break-even point, which is $1,972,770. So at that point, a qualifying property would pay the same amount of taxes under a 25% residential exemption that they would if there was no residential exemption. So there's no benefit to a property owner at that value or higher from the residential exemption. And you can see as the orange bars illustrate, beyond that value, when you get up into the $2 million and higher range, property owners who qualify for the residential exemption actually pay more in taxes with a 25% residential exemption. This is a progressive tax policy that allowed under Massachusetts general law that allows communities to shift a larger burden of the property taxes for the residential class to those higher valued homes and those second homes. However, the property owner qualifying for the residential exemption at those higher values should still apply for the residential exemption, because as illustrated by the difference between the orange bars and the gray bars, there is a financial benefit of $1,478 to every property owner for applying for the residential exemption, even at those higher values. This table illustrates the tax bill savings for a owner-occupied home value at different values with a 25% residential exemption. You can see again, it's the greatest financial benefit are to the lower valued homes, and that diminishes as the property value increases. And on the right-hand side of this table, a owner non-occupied home value at that same value will pay more in taxes with a 25% residential exemption, since they don't qualify for that exemption and they're taxed at the full value as opposed to the net value. Here's what a 30% residential exemption would look like in terms of tax savings and increased taxes for a non-owner occupied home. And once again, at 35%, which is the maximum allowed currently under the law, this table illustrates those savings and the additional taxes paid by non-qualifying homeowners as a result of the residential exemption. That concludes my presentation. I'll be presenting this again on Thursday evening to the full town council. Thank you for watching.